everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Training Unleashed. You're going to have a great show. But first, I want to thank, on behalf of the Learning Network, all of you who are listening or watching the show. I want to thank my sponsors, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio, and remind everybody you can watch the show on YouTube, going to subscribe also to Training Unleashed Network. Today, I've got another guest from FranklinCovey. I love my guests from FranklinCovey because every one of them are incredibly bright, understand the importance of training, and really their company is like one of the leading companies in the world in advancing the thought and the innovation training. My guest is Todd Davis. Like most people at FranklinCovey, he's written books or co-written books, and he spent a lot of his years with FranklinCovey working on innovation in the areas of management. He was also the chief people officer, and today we're going to be focusing on difficult conversations. So Todd, I want to talk about a question I had someone ask me yesterday, and I'd like to hear what advice you would have given this young man. So this young man is a manager, and he probably has somewhere around 30 or 40 people working for him, and he's basically a construction foreman, so to speak.
Okay.
And they do refurbishings, and he believes that one of his electricians is going in, cutting wires, bandaging the wires up, and then coming back later saying, hey, I found that this wire has been cut and we need to replace the whole line so he can charge more money and make more money. And he wants to know, how should he handle this conversation?
Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, Evan, thank you for having me, and thanks for starting off with the zinger there.
Well, I told you I like asking interesting questions.
Yes, you do. Well, okay, that's a great one. And I'm going to assume that your friend, this person that we want to give some advice to, isn't necessarily just wanting to fire this person on the spot. I mean, maybe he's assuming this is happening. He's not 100% positive, or maybe he's positive it's happening, but other than that, other than his dishonesty, this guy's a really good electrician, and so he wants to be able to maintain the relationship. Are those correct assumptions?
First off, I compliment you for asking, because a lot of times people don't get the facts.
Mm-hmm.
I would say he's not afraid of firing someone. He's afraid of firing someone when it's a mistake. And he does have a replacement in this particular case. And I asked him what I thought the likelihood was that this was in fact happening. And without getting into the details of why, he thought it was about a 75% likelihood that it was happening. And after I listened, I thought it was maybe higher than 75%.
Okay, that's really helpful context. So my advice to this person would be, because he's not 100% sure it's happening, anything less than 100%, and I would always seek first to understand, as we say at FranklinCovey. I would always make sure that I've done my due diligence in making sure I'm clear on the facts. And so if I were in his position, and I would coach him to sit down with the gentleman and say, I'm assuming they're both gentlemen. Well,
they are
anyway. And I would say, hey, Joe, we'll call this person Joe. Joe, I need to have a conversation with you about a concern I have on some rework that's been happening in the homes that we're refurbishing. I would state right up front the purpose. I don't know about you, Evan, but there have been times when I've been sitting in a conversation on the receiving end, and the person is dancing around the topic, and I'm thinking, what are they going to talk about here? And so I always coach people, and I do this myself, to state right up front, hey, Joe, I need to have a conversation with you, and it's a concern I have about some of the rework that's being done on the electrical component of these houses. My concern is this, and I want to make sure that I have the full story. It appears as if, and then go into the details you gave, it appears that if some of this wiring is being replaced after it's been manipulated or cut or whatnot, and then there's rework being done. That's what I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume. I want to understand if what I'm seeing is correct. And here's why I'm assuming this is because I'm seeing this, and this, and for your friend to state his facts, and then say, and Joe, I want you to know my only intent is to make sure that we have a great working relationship, that we're doing an honest day's work, that you are being treated fairly and correctly as an employee, but also that we're being honest with the client and with everything that we're building out. So please know that my intent is to make sure that we've got a good working relationship, and that and that we're being a good contractor for this particular client.
Okay. Love your advice. I particularly love the reference to the Covey, seek to first understand. I think it's something that people tend to skip and tend to jump over. And this now leads me to my true, real first question. People tend, in my experience, to white lie, actually lie, cover up, distort to protect themselves. And many times what they're really doing is hurting the company's ability to get the root cause of a problem. But when having a difficult conversation, how do you know the person you're talking to? And in the example that we're giving, the electrician is likely, even if they're guilty, to make up a story that puts them in a good light.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I will tell you, in the business world, in my 18 years as chief people officer, while I had many difficult conversations that I either had personally or I coached leaders to have, they weren't as, I don't want to say black and white, but they weren't necessarily about blatant theft is what I'm going to call this, because it's theft of the money that this your friend is double paying this person. So, but absolutely, human nature, even well-meaning human beings, are going to try and wiggle their way out of an uncomfortable situation if they've been caught doing something they know they shouldn't have been doing. And so, again, if I were in your friend's position, I would say, Joe, it's always been my position to assume good intent. And I want to assume good intent here, but here are the facts as I see them. These wires were put in last week. Everything was fine. And all of a sudden, they appear to be cut. And I'm at a loss to find out who's cutting them. And then we're having to hire you to come in and replace them. So I'd like you to put yourself in my place and tell me what other alternatives are there? What else is happening? I mean, this is difficult because you're accusing someone of being dishonest, in a sense, but you're also creating space for them to create a logical explanation. And I think this is the time when we're not 100%. You said your friend said he's 70% sure this is happening. There could be something that comes up where Joe is a great guy and there's somebody else that is messing up here. I don't know that to be the case, but I think unless we have a camera in this case showing the person doing this, I think human beings need to give that assume that good intent. That's my
So what I'm hearing you say is we have to give people to a certain degree a benefit of the doubt.
Right. We don't have to, but I feel like that's the most effective way to. And let's say this, Evan, let's say Joe is the person, and let's say he does a white lie and say, well, I appreciate that. This is your friend now talking. I appreciate that. I'm optimistic then, if that's what you think is the reason this is happening, that going forward, we won't see this again. And if it resolves itself, there'll be some people that say, well, great. So this guy got away with it and he's never going to have to pay the punishment. Okay, you could look at it that way. You could also look at it as your friend has helped maybe shape this guy's integrity a little bit, and he's going to be maybe a more high integrity, honest person going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was discussing with him, I was talking about my father, and my father is probably known for giving people more second chances, well, for me, than I've ever met. He had a bookkeeper that embezzled from him. He caught her, and he didn't fire her. Most people would.
Wow. Yeah.
He hired someone whose life was destroyed because the FBI had raided the family pharmacy. And his brother was considered a drug dealer, and everyone thought he was a drug dealer, just not charged. And my father hired him. A guy who was a builder, owed my father a lot of money, went bankrupt. My father, instead of getting mad at the guy, hired him. And hired people from work released from prison. But in many, many, many times, I'd say most times, he got rewarded by someone that was incredibly loyal, incredibly hardworking, incredibly effective. So I think your point of giving people the benefit of the doubt it's a legitimate one. Um, let's sort of shift gears here and maybe go back even to the beginning. What is your definition of a difficult question?
Yeah, difficult conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Difficult conversation is whenever emotions are high. It creates this tension, right? When I'm thinking about an upcoming conversation I've got to have with a colleague or even upwards with my boss or whatnot, I'm already thinking about, gosh, how is she going to react? What's she going to feel? What am I going to feel? And so in our minds, we already start to build up this tension that therefore makes the conversation difficult. I mean, it's as simple as that. Emotions cause tension, and tensions make conversations difficult.
Okay. So sometimes we know a conversation will be difficult before going into it, and
Mhm.
sometimes conversations become difficult without us recognizing that we're going to hit a thorn or something that's going to create that difficulty.
Right.
If you know you're going to have a difficult conversation, what are the best practices for you in preparing for that conversation?
Well, I'm so glad you asked because my best practice and our best practice in the course that we offer and what I've done for most of my career, I go into that conversation with thinking about the balance of courage and consideration. Courage, by courage, I mean, what is it that I need out of this conversation? If I'm initiating the conversation with Joe, back to our electrician's helper friend, and what do I need? Well, I need this problem to stop. And I need Joe to know that I'm aware of this problem, that I'm concerned he might be a part of the problem. But whatever it is, that's what I need out of the conversation. So I've got to make sure that I've got this level of courage going into the conversation. Consideration, I've got to be thinking through Joe's eyes. What does Joe need? Well, first and foremost, Joe's a human being. And even though maybe he's been dishonest, he needs to feel respected. If I start out making Joe feel defensive, we're going to go right to escalating this conversation. So approaching Joe as a human being, I've got to have that consideration, and then I've got to think, what does Joe need out of this conversation? Well, Joe needs to know about my concerns. Joe needs to know about the likelihood of the employment continuing. I got to be straight and clear with him. And so going into that conversation, any conversation, with thinking about the level of courage and consideration I have and trying to have this near even balance of that at the beginning and then throughout the conversation as emotions tend to cause turbulence that get us off balance in the conversation.
I like what you're saying, in particular, having the courage to have that kind of open question. And I know I started the whole example at the beginning. Um, but let's take the same question, but you're dealing with a person who isn't being deceptive or being dishonest, but just is a poor performer, not doing as much work as other people are doing. Somebody that either you're going to need to retrain, shift to a new role that maybe is a better fit, or maybe you need to terminate them because there's no role that would work.
Yeah.
How would that approach be different?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, uh, it wouldn't necessarily be that different. I've got a perfect example in mind. Obviously, I'm not going to share the name, but I'm thinking of someone years ago who was on my team. I was their leader, and they were a good person. Don't get me wrong. This is a good person, like you said. They're not doing anything dishonest, and they performed well in parts of their job. But there were some parts of their job they weren't performing well, and they weren't getting any better. And we had given them a lot of feedback, and they weren't getting any better. And I was preparing for a conversation with this person. And I avoided it for a while because I liked this person so much and I was worried about our relationship going forward that I avoided it longer than I should have. But I finally, put on my big boy pants and I thought, okay, I got to sit down with this person to have the conversation. And so it wasn't much different. In other words, courage and consideration. I started out the conversation and I'll call this person Fred. And I said, Fred, I need to talk to you about your role and about some performance issues that we have talked about before, but it's coming to a point of decision here. I want you to know that's the intent of this conversation. Fred, I also want you to know I care about you deeply. You are a wonderful human being, and you do a lot of your role very well. But there are parts that you're not doing well, and they're not getting better. And I'm concerned about the likelihood of this being a successful fit going forward. But please know that my only intent, Fred, is to help you be wildly successful in whatever role you're in. So that is why I'm taking the time to share what I'm going to share with you. Again, I would begin the conversation, and I did begin that conversation with courage, letting him know this is a problem, but also that my intent is to help him be successful.
The other thing you did was you made it clear there was really a problem.
That's right. Yeah.
Because a lot of times people aren't so clear. And
I'm so glad you bring that up, Evan, because going back to courage and consideration, we all have our tendency, and I don't know you well enough to know what yours is, but neither one's wrong. But people either feel more comfortable leading with courage and being really direct, or they feel more comfortable leading with consideration and being more concerned about that part. And most people in the learning and development field tend to be the latter, not 100%, but they tend to be why they're in the human resources areas, because they're so in tune with people. And I'm going to tell you, and I had to learn this. When I would begin a conversation like the one I just shared with you with Fred, I used to begin with the consideration part. Hey, Fred, first of all, I want you to know you're a wonderful person. I think you're great. My only intent is to help you be successful in your role. And then I would talk about the purpose. And the reason that I coach people to flip that, always start with the purpose, is sometimes you will sugarcoat the consideration part so much, the purpose never really comes through, or it doesn't come through clearly. Fred doesn't leave that conversation going, wow, I think my job's on the line. He comes through thinking, oh, Todd thinks I'm a wonderful guy, and yeah, I gotta get this right someday. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. It is important, the order of our courage and then our consideration.
Hey, everyone. This episode is brought to you by the Learning Network. Speed up your testing process with QuizBase, one of the Learning Network's many resources. Our well-structured quizzes are easy to customize and self-scoring. Whether you need a standalone test or integrate with products like Skillshare, QuizBase has the solution. Visit learning.net to learn more or to do a demo. As a manager of people and helping grow and coach people, I've had so many people have a disciplinary conversation to really highlight that there's a problem, and then talk to the person that was on the receiving end, not even know they had one.
I've heard of those. I have heard of those. Yeah, hopefully I haven't been responsible for those, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
At what point do you put things in writing?
Well, I love that you asked that. Obviously, with formal performance plans and somebody's job's on the line, those are all, each company has their own process for that, but every process that I've ever been familiar with and that we've had are in writing. But to your point, whenever I have a difficult conversation with one, I can probably think of an exception, but not many. I will always, always, always send a follow-up email. So certainly in this conversation with your friend and the electrician, I would. But let's think of just a coaching conversation I have with someone. I mean, it's difficult because there's some jobs, some parts of their job they're not performing well, but they're not headed towards losing their job. But I have this conversation with them. I will always send an email and say, hey, Susan, thanks so much for our time today. I really appreciate it. I know it was not the most comfortable conversation, but I appreciated your transparency, your openness. Here's what we discussed. And I will bullet point the 3 things. We agreed that this, or I said that this. Have I missed anything? It paves the way for effective moving forward effectively in the long run. So that in your or what you were talking about earlier, sometimes the person will see this in writing and go, oh, wow, I didn't think that's what we talked about. And so it's this opportunity to make sure we're on the same page. I don't ever say in those things, here's what I captured. Do you agree? I say, here's what we discussed. Have I missed anything? And I'm thinking more of a leader to an employee type thing, but just to make sure that the employee, you and I have both experienced this. There's real magic when you see something in writing versus what you just heard. And all of a sudden in writing, I'm going, oh, well, yeah, I guess that is what we talked about, but wow, this is really important. So there's a real benefit to always following up in an email or a letter, probably an email.
Okay. So I want to talk about another topic here.
Okay.
It's on topic, but it's slightly different. And I know that part of what you do is talk about mindset.
Mm,
And that's super important. So this will kind of cover that and the topic that I want in terms of difficult conversations.
okay.
And I made reference to this earlier. Sometimes you go into a conversation not knowing it's going to be difficult, and then it becomes difficult. It's very easy for a person to be triggered, become upset, etc. What kind of advice would you give somebody that sort of stepped on a minefield they didn't expect to make sure they reset and have a productive
Yeah.
conversation?
Great question. So in our course, and I'm not here pitching a course, but I've used these tools for so long that they come up naturally. But what we talk about are three key tools to use when needed, and those are pause, observe, and ask. We say pause, don't panic, observe, don't judge, and ask, don't assume. And I bring those up because it doesn't happen often, but like you said, every once in a while, I'll start out with what I thought was going to be an easy conversation, and there is a lot of emotion there that I was unaware of. In fact, this did happen to me about a month ago, and I called up to follow up on a routine thing, and this person had been holding back on a lot of feelings that they had, and it turned quite emotional. And in that conversation, I said to this person, "Wow, I'm just transparent," and I just said, "Wow, I honestly I did not foresee this coming. I didn't know that you felt this strongly about that. Could we take a time out?" It's exactly what I said. "Could we take a time out? I need to think through this." And I said to the person, "I'm going to be honest with you. I I want to make sure that I'm addressing your concerns in a respectful way, and so I need time to think through what you've just shared with me. So if we could reschedule the rest of this meeting for later today or tomorrow, whatever, that I've used that, not used, but yeah, I've used that technique. The reason I don't want to say technique is that's not true. It's not manipulation. It's just I'm just open with them and say I need to pause here because I need to think about that. If there's not that opportunity, sometimes you don't have that opportunity. I have to be mature enough to, in my own mind, reset and say, "Gosh, let's just slow down here. These are some new information that I was unaware of. Would you tell me a little bit more about why you're feeling this way?" And I would just go into pure listening mode and trying to understand, so that I can do the best I can job of responding in the moment and then sharing my thoughts. But the point here, I know I'm rambling a little bit, Evan, you'll summarize it better, but it's to take a time out. It's to just slow
Yeah,
down. Dr. Stephen Covey used to say, "With people, fast is slow and slow is fast." And I think those words just came to mind because sometimes you just got to slow down and make sure we're understanding each other.
I think it's excellent advice because I think when you're triggered, unless you really well trained, it's hard to untrigger yourself in the moment.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think it's great advice. I've come up with a question. It's an incredibly selfish question, but I think the audience, because we have training professionals, will feel it's equally selfish for them.
Okay.
Okay.
Good clarification.
Yes. So I'm being very honest with you. I am constantly impressed with the work FranklinCovey does.
Thank you.
And, this is, I think, my fifth podcast with someone with FranklinCovey, although two were with Chris McChesney. So you're the fourth person. I whenever there's a FranklinCovey book that comes out, I read it. Okay. And I go, this is amazing. And like you just went through that three-step process, which I can't for the life of me remember the three steps, but it was about being
Pause, don't
calm.
panic, observe, don't
Right.
judge, and ask, don't assume.
How does a Covey organization develop content like that? How do you ideate it and how do you validate it?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your compliments, first of all. As I've mentioned, I've been here for 28 years. We've been in the leadership space for 4 decades, for 40 years. And so, with that time and experience, we work with global leaders all over. I mean, obviously, because they're global, we work with leaders around the world. We work with leaders around the world. And so we glean from the best leadership skills. We have the opportunity to observe and work with amazing leaders and leaders who struggle. And so it's from that. And then we have a remarkable innovations team. I used to be a part of that. And then it got remarkable after I left. But I used to be a part of the innovations team. And so we have great developers, writers, researchers. We do a ton of research on our own and then with other reputable organizations around the world so that we can find out what are the most pressing problems for organizations around the world. And then we can invest our time and money in those solutions. So we have a very dedicated group in our innovations team that's doing research all the time and helping us create the world-class solutions that you're talking about.
So what I'm hearing is that you guys listen well and you observe not just from your own content, but you observe what you're seeing around you, learn, adapt, and then validate through research and testing and things of that nature. Very impressive.
You're right. We partner with, we acquire content and we partner with content. Many people have heard of Liz Wiseman, who is the best-selling author of Multipliers. She was a senior executive at Oracle for many years. And so we have partnered with Liz, and Multipliers is now one of our courses that we offer. It's Liz Wiseman's content. So we also don't pretend to say that, hey, we're the only ones that come up with great content, but we find other great content around the world and partner with brilliant thought leaders that have authored that content as well.
So humble too. Because no, seriously, because people that are not humble would not ever dream of partnering with someone else on their content with the history of success you have. And I think that's you're in essence, what you're saying is your company is managed like the leadership you actually advertise. You walk the walk.
Well, we try. We fall down a lot, but we get back up. But we have this aspirational goal of always trying to model our content, to your point. So thank you for saying that.
So Todd, clearly anyone been listening can tell how bright you are, how smart, and the vast knowledge you have on this topic. Everyone knows FranklinCovey. Could you tell people a little bit more about your products and your offerings and the services you have in this particular area for people that might be interested in digging deeper?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking. So FranklinCovey, as I mentioned, we're a global company specializing in what we call performance improvement. What we do, Evan, is help organizations achieve results when achieving those results requires a change in human behavior. Now, I think about changing my own behavior and how hard, when I was on the treadmill this morning, thinking how difficult that can be. But think about changing a whole bunch of other people's behaviors, and collectively, that is what we do. We've been in that space for 40 years. And so when behavior change is the requirement, that is what we do. We have over 35 solutions that we customize based on what the needs are of organizations. We have a role called an implementation strategist. These are people, very highly trained associates of FranklinCovey, who work with L&D leaders in their organizations to put together their learning journeys, their impact journeys, we call them, based on whatever the organization or the team that we're working with needs. So that's a little bit about who FranklinCovey is. We have, for the last 10 years, 11 years, we moved to something called the All Access Pass. This is so people don't necessarily buy a 7 Habits class from FranklinCovey or a Speed of Trust class from FranklinCovey. They buy a pass. They're pass holders. And we have lifelong pass holders. We have pass holders with 5, 6, 7-year agreements where they have access to all of our FranklinCovey solutions and videos in this implementation strategist role, and they have this ongoing partnership with us. So sorry to go into sales mode there, but that is what we do.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand. And, a lot of people here in the training space or HR space or operations space, and FranklinCovey has a world of content. We're the Learning Network. We're a learning organization. We develop content. What makes us completely different from FranklinCovey is we're experts in taking your content, your knowledge, and creating it in an interactive, interesting, compelling way to create great adult learning to affect the way change. We don't present ourselves as subject matter experts. We present ourselves as experts at creating learning content, whether it's online, virtual reality or in person, based on on you having your own subject matter experts. So it's completely different. And there are many times when people will come to us with a problem and they don't know the solution. And we recommend other organizations and say, well, these would be the people to go with to help you, solve those problems, because that's not what we do. We're amazing. I mean, at helping people creating interactive, compelling, interesting, and effective training. But it's totally different. So I wanted people to really make sure they understood what you did, because I think it's so important. And it sounds like a love fest, but I'll just say this before I ask you. You never mentioned that your website, which is FranklinCovey.com, I assume.
That's right. Yeah, sorry. FranklinCovey.com, Covey. Some people tripped up on the spelling.
But one of the most important things is you guys have lasted past your founder, and you've lasted 40 years in leading in really, human resources and productivity training. It's really impressive. So Todd, we're running out of time, and every guest gets the privilege of sharing one tip. If you had one tip to share with the audience, what would that one tip be?
Wow. Just one?
just one. If it's super good, we sometimes let two sneak in, but
no, just one. One that I have found particularly useful for myself and for those I coach is, at the end of the day, we are all just human beings. I don't mean just human beings. We are all amazing human beings. And so my tip would be as transparent with everyone with whom you interact. Be as transparent as you can be. Don't let someone's title or position, or both ways, whether they're very senior or whether they're very junior, don't let that determine how you interact with that person, what you share with that person, the courage and the consideration that you share for that person. As we grow older, as I grow older, I can't say that about you. As I grow older, it becomes easier just to see everyone as another human being and not be so thrown off or intimidated by a title or a position. And I know at the end of the day, we are much more effective, and we contribute much more to society and to our businesses and to our personal lives if we just value and treat each other as fellow human beings. That's my high-minded one tip.
Well, it's an excellent tip, and I have to share this story because the story is kind of funny. I work on myself and personal development all the time, and I'm constantly working on things. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I decided that I wanted to eliminate, as much as humanly possible, white lies, just because I felt they weren't transparent. And I felt like every time I had a white lie, I was diminishing myself in my own mind, and to some degree with other people, because I was not being authentic. So I started being very honest with my wife. She'd ask me how she looked, or she'd ask me about a dress, she'd ask me about this. And she clearly did not like this transformation. And then I told her what I was doing. And she goes, "Oh, that makes so much sense." And then it was fine. So the point is, if you're going to be more transparent, you might let some people know.
Give them a heads up as to the new you.
The new you. So Todd, on behalf of the Learning Network, thank you for being a guest. To the listeners who are learners and lifelong learners, because those are the people that listen to the show. Thank you for being here. And of course, thank you, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. And sometime have fun. Check us out on YouTube, Training Unleashed Network. Everyone have a great day.